typically be inclined to think are very personal. And yet, cases after case in news coverage reminds us that where medical issues are concerned, the personal is political, and the political is personal. As Gideon Labner, faculty mentor and professor in clinical laboratory sciences, eloquently explains in a recent interview, studying medical humanities allows students to, there's a quote here, strip away policies and protocols for a moment and look at the situations in an apolitical light. Or, in other cases, the students may not be looking at political implications of a medical issue and need to do so. For students in CLS who aren't usually dealing directly with the patient, it's just as important. Okay, that's the end of the quote. So here, Labner recalls an example he has used in his own courses, Typhoid Mary. Is this a familiar case to most people? I didn't know about Typhoid Mary until I found out from him, but this is apparently, so I see some heads nodding. So, but apparently Mary, who worked with food, this is towards the beginning of the century, towards the beginning of the 20th century. Apparently Mary Malone, who worked with food and later blood samples, one was unaware, or maybe willfully unaware, of her carrier status, right? She was a healthy woman, but she caused the illness of 22 people and the death of 3. Mary may have believed that on account of her Irish immigration or her socioeconomically inferior status as an unattached woman and domestic servant, that she was unduly persecuted when she was largely isolated from society on an island. The question in the Typhoid Mary film, as well as in the real case it is based on, might be, where do one person's rights stop and another person's end? And who has the right to make decisions about this matter? In the case of Typhoid Mary, for us looking back now, I think we may come to a general consensus that the public welfare takes an easy precedent. But the thought of exile to a relative isolation on a remote island hardly seems an appealing or even fair option for someone whose only crime may be healthy carrier status. So to go back to my sister's keeper, since little factual information about the case is available right now. I've tried to track it down, but so the family apparently is pretty private about what's happened since the conception. The implications of an initial bioethical decision to create a donor child are revealed. Even beyond the question of who has control over the conception and termination of life is the question of whether it is ethical to save the life of one child by means of causing bodily harm to another, right? This child is created not only for blood transfusion, but for bone marrow transfusion as well. So I'm referring here to the whole issue of children's rights, okay? That's one from the moment of her birth, her umbilical cord, her blood, her bone marrow. We think it is strictly the bioengineered child's rights the story addresses. Yet in a complicated twist toward the end of both the book and the novel, it's revealed that it's Kate, not Anna, the child who suffers from leukemia, who desires Anna to sue her parent for her rights to her own body. So applying the first do no harm principle to real life situations similar to the Fitzgerald girls, the question becomes, whose best interests are we acting in? Who has the right to make the best interest decision, and for whom? Of course, the same question must be and has been raised with respect to the treatment of entire economic and ethnic groups. The Tuskegee case, and more locally the Cincinnati General Hospital radiation experiments come to mind. The Tuskegee experiment, instilled in our collective cultural memories through oral tradition, written expression, like Bad Blood and the film Miss Evers' Boys, was a government study involving several African-American men who believed they were being treated for syphilis, but who were given placebos instead. And there's an interesting difference between the movie and the Bad Blood account in the nurse's implication in the whole experiment. Miss Evers in the film, Miss Evers' Boys, is just sort of just doing the very best she can, right in the book, in the research. Miss Rivers is the nurse's real name. It seems less clear that she may actually know a lot more of what is really going on and has sort of talked herself into it that somehow this is okay. So it's very, very interesting implications within the community. This is sort of the questions of why and how and who believed what greater good was being served there. So in the treatment, Martha Stevens reveals a reverse situation, over-treatment, this time for cancer. Lower income patients across racial and ethnic lines come to Cincinnati General to be treated for cancer and are unwittingly irradiated at experimentally high doses. In some cases, it is suspected that the patient has died from irradiation, not from the cancer itself. It is important to note, as Ledner suggests, that ethically ambiguous situations that occur close to home, more so than any, may need specific examination. Is somehow, when we think of something that's far away, like Typhoid Mary, well, that's in New York, and that was over a century ago, but somehow there's something that may have occurred right here and not in the not too distant past that may once more wake us up to just the possibility that it really still may be going on. Okay, and then I'm just going to end this section with the thought that in situations involving medical ethics, where the story is not written in as a story that is somehow packaged through some kind of very readable and accessible form or film culture, it really does tend to escape from public scrutiny. Right, we're talking about the Smith-Kline laboratories and so forth. So in this section, I turn to a discussion of the development of the discipline formerly known as medical humanities. Right. At one point, medical humanities was just a notion. It has been formalized as a discipline. So I'll follow this up with a discussion of how we at UC have been engaged in the medical humanities for quite some time now, but ending with thoughts on where we are now, formally and informally, and where we might go from here. I want to state that what I offer here is by no means a comprehensive account of medical humanities, right? Or of medical humanities at UC. I have tried. I have run to every corner of the campus, believe me. But I'm always surprised to find that there's one more that I've missed, right? I guess that's sort of the nature of the beast of medical humanities. But at least I do attempt to offer a handrail, if not a roadmap. I also hereby acknowledge the contributions of my several interviewees, whose contributions are sometimes individually acknowledged, but whose thoughts are also sometimes interwoven with my own, to the point where it's sometimes difficult for me to give them credit. Nevertheless, I'd like to specifically acknowledge those who I have formally interviewed within the last month, which is Gideon Labner, Terry Primo, Edward Wallace, Isla Rappaport, Sean Keating, Joanna Mitro, and Valerie Hardcastle. It is important to point out that the medical humanities movement and medical humanities at UC didn't really begin at any exact moment here or elsewhere. The medical humanities is really a classical construct, as during the Renaissance, a university education consisted of 5 elements of literature, philosophy, law, mathematics, and medicine. Right? So medical humanities, you could say, was woven into the idea of the university, to put it in John Newman's terms. Right? So, however, with the divisions of university education in the latter 19th century, I guess we could say, medical humanities went underground. When did it come back enough to be formally recognized? How has it since then become a discipline in its own right? Once I asked a respected professor of film and visual culture how exactly we might recognize a film as an actual Western rather than just as a film set in the West. His answer to me, and I think he was being partially serious, was that it was by the hat. So it is with medical humanities. Some organizing, identifying, or classifying principle allows medical humanities to emerge as a disciplinary identity, creating a conversation, a discourse, and potentially a community. So since the turn of the millennium, the disciplinary designation, medical humanities, has gone viral, or I should say gone international. But the viral metaphor isn't perfectly accidental, since the internet has in fact been quite useful for the cohesion definition and resource sharing within medical humanities. For example, in 2006, the Litany of New